you say. Bless your heart, need it in the worst way. La la la, la 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 la. I'm a champion, la la la.
Hello, I'm Sharon Adjustment. I'm the co-founder of the Israel Conference. We're dedicated to the business of Israel and bringing it out to the world so that the world can know a lot more about the phenomenal Israeli forward thinkers that are available in the market. Today, we're having a conversation with one of those innovators of thought that will help us understand better the world of Israel and the world at large. You can find all of our interviews online at theisraelconference.org, where we meet with phenomenal thinkers, innovators, category creators, and today will be a great conversation about the thought process of the world and Israel. Our conversation today leans towards the fabric of society, which allows for a stable environment for commerce and for the state of Israel to participate heavily in the international commerce world. We have an opportunity to look at the foundational issues that affect business in the past few years, and we have had tremendous disruptions, as we all know. From BDS success in twisting the narrative against Israel and convincing institutions to divest from Israel while using, ironically, Israeli-developed technology to get their message out. Then we have the events of October 7th, where the narrative flipped from Israel being attacked to Israel attacking, painting Israel as the negative aggressor, and thus, by extension, a country to shun. Ironically, as we will be discussing in future podcasts with VCs, Israel in the past 2 years has experienced tremendous economic success with large international transactions and impressive new products and technology, which the world craves, buys, and uses, although often without the imprint of made in Israel or designed in Israel as a genuflection to those boycotts. But all that can change. And we're going to learn today from our wonderful guest, Gol Kalev. Gol is a former Wall Street investment banker, and for the last decade, he's been researching Theodor Herzl, the godfather of Israel, modern Israel, and the intersection with Zionism. He is the chair of the America-Israel Friendship League think tank. He writes for many papers, including the Jerusalem Post, and he's seen frequently on news stations talking about Israel, Zionism, and Judaism 3.0. Gol has written 2 books recently. Each of them are page turners, and each are addressing the topic of Zionism and the effect of the world attitudes today and of yesteryear. We have Judaism 3.0 and the assault on Judaism, the existential threat coming from the West. I want to welcome Gol today to you and to us to talk a lot about what's in these phenomenal books, which I encourage you to buy wherever books are sold. I bought mine on Amazon. Gol, welcome. We want to talk about this. Thank you. We love having you here. You're a great thinker, and we're going to learn so much. So buckle up, everybody, and let's take a listen. We're going to talk today a lot about something you talk about, Gol, which is why Israel is a necessity for humanity. Before you begin, I want to mention a powerful poem that all of us know, and there's an irony in it as well, because it's a priest who was a prominent Lutheran pastor in Germany in the 1920s and the 1930s. And he really loved the whole Nazi thought process, and he was a big supporter of it. But by 1933, he started to see the light. And by the end of the war, he himself found himself in concentration camps, and the world split on him. So his poem says, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." It's a powerful, powerful poem. I think that some of your writings delve into the same very topic. Gol, how did you leave investment banking and start to become a world-class philosopher?
I think there were a couple of vectors. One is, as you mentioned, I started studying Theodor Herzl, who is the father of modern day Zionism, but also a person who planted the seeds for the transformation of Judaism. That was one vector, and I've discovered a lot of things that were a surprise to me. The other, that in my investment banking work, you would meet CEOs and being present to boards, and a lot of them just wanted to talk to me about Israel and not about J.P. Morgan's or Solomon Smith Barney's capabilities, the firms I worked for over the decades. So that's sort of like been the vector. I've formed a non-academic think tank that we now call the Judaism 3.0 think tank. We housed it in the past in the America-Israel Friendship League to kind of hash out these ideas. And really my thesis that the Judaism is going through a historic transformation, that the Jewish state and Zionism are becoming the organizing principle of Judaism. People relate to Jews and Judaism through it in the positive and negative. And therefore, quite naturally, age-old opposition to Judaism is directed through the Jewish state and through Zionism. So that's sort of like been the digression. But mostly, investment banking was when I lived in New York. I spent a lot of time in New York, in Europe, did mergers and acquisitions around the world. But I always knew that one day I'm going to come back home to Israel. That one day was, next year for many, many years and decades. But thank God I'm home in Israel and have the opportunity to write and research about all the things that you mentioned.
Yes, and you live in one of the most gorgeous places in Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
It's almost poetic in that neighborhood.
Yes. Yep.
So you do have that wonderful opportunity.
Yes.
How is, from your point of view, Zionism a relevant part of Judaism?
Yeah, when Theodor Herzl that I mentioned, he revolutionized Judaism because he recognized that the Judaism of his time, what I call Judaism 2.0, that started when the Jews were exiled from Judea and then lasted for almost 2,000 years, he realized that it is reactionary to European persecution. Nothing about Judaism is organic. Well, yes, we keep Shabbat and yes, we're religious and all of that, but our primary behavior is in reaction to the way that European prosecutes us. So if they deport us, let's say from England or from France or from Spain, then we move. So that is, moving countries, being deported is the primary thing. When they tell us that we're only allowed to have one child, well, that defines us. When they tell us we're not allowed to go into a particular city, or we have to walk on the right street or the left street. So he realized that he compared Judaism to a sea lion. It's really a lion, but it was thrown into the sea of European persecution, what we now call anti-Semitism, and therefore developed fins. It started behaving like a fish. The Jew, is a sea lion, which we all think of. We think of sea lion as a marine animal, not as a lion. But that's not the organic Judaism. And what he was said to do is to transform Judaism back into its organic state. And the process of this transformation is Zionism. He said from the onset that he realizes that people are going to misunderstand Zionism to be a movement of immigration from Europe and the Middle East to Palestine, just like people might have thought that what Moses led was an immigration of the nascent Hebrew nation from Egypt to Canaan. But Herzl analyzed Moses and said Moses didn't do that. Immigration was merely a tool. He was transforming the Hebrews. He was doing what Herzl called re-education through immigration. And that is exactly what Theodor Herzl planned to do with the Zionist movement, to form the seeds for the transformation of Judaism. And all the things that you talked about, Sharona, innovations and all the things that are happening in Israel are thanks to this transformed Jew that we have here in Israel that Herzl seeded. So Zionism is not just, became the organizing principle of Judaism, as I mentioned at the beginning, and people relate to us in the positive or negative through Judaism, but it's the enabler of the immense light that we are spreading to the world. Zionism has become the light upon the nations.
That's super powerful, and it breaks the theory that Israel came to be out of the ashes of the Holocaust. It's really out of the imagination of Theodor Herzl that we have the modern state of Israel.
Absolutely. Theodor Herzl is one of those rare figures in history that if he didn't exist, like Moses, I don't know how history will evolve. We cannot do a what if, but he really revolutionized Judaism, and we're still in the very early stages of understanding Herzl. As you know, I'm a little bit of a Herzl enthusiast, and in my columns, I try to apply Herzl's wisdom and frameworks to a lot of things today, both to business, both to the future of Europe, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because he wrote a lot. He left us with a lot of thinking that we can apply to today's issues.
Absolutely. I would like to actually use this as a point of entry to what have been the eras that brought Herzl to that great moment where he thought he dreamed it and it became a reality, which is the one of the classic phrases. You mentioned in your books that in the 10th century, we have the Crusades. So England is turning its back on Judaism. Then in the 15th century, Spain turns their back on Judaism through the Inquisition. Then in the 19th century, we have France turning its back on the patriotic presence of their citizens. That whole egalite, fraternite, liberté goes right out the door when Theodor Herzl in the 1890s is watching the Dreyfus Affair trial, where a loyal, patriotic French citizen whose last name is associated to being a Jew gets accused of committing a crime against the country and is stripped of all his status in the army and ousted in a very non-courageous way by the country of France. And Theodor Herzl is a reporter watching all this happen. Tell us what occurs from that story.
Yeah, Theodor Herzl was living in an environment in which the conventional wisdom in his milieu was that Jew hatred was over. Because for the entirety of modern history, as you mentioned, the Crusades and otherwise, the opposition to Judaism occurred through religious frameworks. So, when Europe was religious and Jews were religious, that was Europeans opposed Jews and Judaism because of religious reasons. Around the time of Herzl in the late 19th century, at least France and much of Germany and a lot of Western Europe become secular. So people said, okay, well, now that Europe is secular, there's no reason to hate the Jews. And Herzl had this view at the beginning, but quickly realized that European opposition to Judaism will follow whatever the European and Jewish circumstances tend to be. So now that Europe is secular and the Jews are emancipated, then that hatred will follow that. And around this time, a new ideology emerged that's known as anti-Semitism. We today use the term anti-Semitism retroactively to describe the entirety of Jew hatred throughout the history. But at the 1890s, there was a debate, is anti-Semitism Jew hatred or not? Because a lot of anti-Semites said, well, we're just expressing a political views, and in fact, we love the Jews, and it's just criticism. You guys are too rich, you do horrible stuff in the stock market, you speculate, there were a lot of Jews that bought coal mines and reduced safety standards, and a lot of European dies, and you have Jews all over music, and Jews taking over theater, and Jews taking over church. So it's criticism. It's legitimate. It's a political view. And Herzl entertained the idea, and he said that he developed a liberal attitude towards the anti-Semitic movement. It's very, very similar to today's Israel bashing and anti-Zionism, because there's a debate today where to draw the line between legitimate or acceptable criticism of Israel and what is outright Jew hatred. Same with anti-Semitism back then. In both books, I draw those parallels. They are staggering. And Herzl recognized that European opposition to Judaism is chronic. He mocked, committees against anti-Semitism. I've just attended a conference against, to counter anti-Semitism. I'm going to another one next week, so I don't want to mock them. But Herzl's understood that the whole idea of combating anti-Semitism is a joke, is futile, because dogmatic minds cannot change. What's needed in Herzl's mind was a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift was the establishment of the Jewish state. And that will create two things. One is the most more proper interface to manage this European-Israeli conflict, which is the longest conflict in the world, still going on for 2,300 years since the Greek invaded Judea. So when you have you have Europe and you have a Jewish state, then there's going to be a proper interface to manage the conflict. But mostly it's what you alluded to at the beginning. It will create what we call today peace through strength. Because once the Jews are emancipated from this intense European persecution that have defined us for 2,000 years, then we will produce innovations that will advance humanity to ways that humanity cannot even imagine. So Herzl anticipated what we call today the startup nation and understood that we're going to get to a level that Europe will have to, deal with us. Well, the Jewish state will exist because it will be the necessity of the world. That is exactly what happened today. So Herzl championed what we call today peace through strength. It wasn't because Europeans started loving us. It's because, in Herzl's view, they will need us. They will need the innovations that we produce.
And there's an irony that sits right smack dab in the middle of that. Those that oppose Israel use technology designed and developed in Israel to promote their opposition. And there's a lack of knowledge, lack of information out there as to what Israel is in fact delivering. All the medical technology, the communication technology, even space technology, not to mention design and art that is innovative in its own. There's so much that comes out of this tiny, tiny little country that affects every household throughout the world.
Absolutely. And, people maybe don't realize or don't care. But we were in a situation today that people, on the one hand, as you said, depend on us. On the other hand, I wrote an article a few years ago that anti-Zionism is anti-humanity by definition, because there's a crisp light that's beaming out of Zion, and people can either embrace it and use it, people can oppose it, and as you said, some people both use it and oppose it.
Yes. So in the world, we have the international courts, the ICC, pulling down condemnations on Israel and thus really impairing commerce. And again, ironically, putting a nail in their own progress forward. And then even in the United States, and there were sanctions against Israeli citizens, mostly just for being Israeli citizens, and their ability to have their own form of free speech. How do you square that with what you're writing about in your books?
Well, as Herzl said, that in every generation, basically, there's a European-led attempt to oppose Judaism, or as we say soon in the Passover Seder, in every generation, somebody rises up to eradicate us. And that attempt to eradicate us uses technologies, mechanism, jargon of that era.
Yes.
And in our era, the attempt to eradicate Judaism is through an ideological assault that's coming from the West. We are, as we're sitting here today, are facing a dual assault, a physical assault on the Jewish nation that's coming from Iran and its proxies, a seven-front war that we're fighting, an ideological assault that's coming from the West that at its core is an attempt to negate the idea of the Jewish state and through it to negate the idea of Judaism. And what I show in the book and in my articles is that attempt is also a proxy for an assault on America and its own Judeo-Christian values.
Take us through a little bit of what you talked about, how England gave up its colonization activities and ultimately now yearns for the United States as one of its early colonized geographies to become its ally and friend. And the fracture that is ongoing between Europe and the United States, and how that is an extension of the fracture between Europe's view of anti-religion and Israel's view on building itself beyond and through Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I wrote an article also a few years ago in Newsweek claiming that the philosophical divide of our time is between Americanism and Europeanism. Just like in the 20th century, it was between capitalism and communism, and a lot of the world geopolitics sort of followed that. In the 19th century, it was between the idea of monarchy and republicanism. And in our time, you have two competing philosophies. The Europeanism, which is anchored today, the way it evolved, in post-nationalism, post-ideology, universalism, secularism, atheism, and now anti-theism, and Americanism, which is based on particularity, on nationalism, on success, on a merit-based system. In God we trust, one nation under God. And you see the world sort of aligning between those. Now, these are not America versus Europe. There are European or sphere of influence, if you will, in the United States and vice versa. But you see Israel, the United States, and much of the Arab world that are not saying, "Okay, we're all the same. We're all humans. There's no national." So no, we are, Arabs, or we are Muslims, or we are Jews, or we are Christians. We're proud of that. And you see this divide playing out in politics, playing out in like you said earlier, in the way that we're being condemned, or the basis on which we're being condemned. The American Revolution was not, to use what we spoke about earlier, was also not about just a bunch of people immigrating from Europe to America. This was an exodus, not just geographically, but ideological, from the Europeanism way of thinking, that when things are good, we thank the king because God appoints the king, and when things are bad, we blame the Jews. The American Revolution is something completely different. And, instead of divine right monarchy, it became a divine right republic, one nation under God. And it's intertwined. Americanism and Zionism are sister ideologies from the beginning and certainly through today. And we're seeing it playing out now. And we are seeing European opposition to the American-led world. You mentioned the International Criminal Court. The ICC action against Israel was not just against Israel. It was a challenge to the U.S.-led world order, because today's U.S.-led world order is based on military might and economic might. Europe needs the United States for that. But what the Europeans are trying to do with the ICC is to create a new power base that I call legal might, or some people call it lawfare, where they can tell the Americans, yes, we need you, America, for your military and economic protection, but you need us, Europe, for legal protection, because we, Europeans, can put you, President Trump, in jail. We can put President Obama in jail. We can put every single American soldier in jail. And we don't even need the ICC, by the way, because many European countries have laws that they can arrest American soldiers if, let's say, in Iraq, a civilian that died happened to be a Belgian citizen. So Belgium can, might have laws like that. So we are in a reality where there is a European challenge to the U.S.-led world order, and this, to understand what's happening now, to understand that the Trump switching from European-based frameworks like the two-state solution and various divide the baby frameworks that are external to the Middle East, that are imposed by the West, and that just perpetuate conflict, into more American-type ideas that are win-win and can promote peace and benefit all of the region. That is also a byproduct of this Europeanism versus Americanism tension.
A very fascinating point, because in your book you also write how Israel is the testing ground for this aggressive behavior. And for example, with Iran and their activities over the past year and a half of having their proxies attack Israel is fundamentally a test on the United States. Can Iran, not Europe, but Iran, attack the United States by attacking Israel as proving their might and power? And stopping them at this point is going to disprove their perception of themselves as superheroes that are saving the world to bring forth whatever their vision is.
Absolutely. I mean, Iran and the physical assault on Judaism, Iran views us as little Satan and attacks us as a proxy for attacking big Satan. In the ideological assault that's coming from the ICC and from Europe, they view us, Israel, as little war criminal and attack us ideological as a proxy for attacking big war criminal, which they view the United States to be. So those two are, the physical attack and the ideological attack are autonomous, but they feed off each other, and they both serve as a proxy for attacking the United States, no doubt about it.
So let's go back to the fundamentals. Probably most folks hear Judaism 3.0 and they say, well, what does that mean? So take us through the 1.0, the 2.0, 3.0 point of view that you have.
Sure. So when you look at the history of Judaism, at the beginning, both the biblical narrative, archaeologists, historians all agree that Judaism was anchored in Judea, in the Jewish nation, physical presence in Judea, with a center in Jerusalem, which is called Zion, and the temple. The temple where the worship was conducted in the form of sacrifices. So Judaism 1.0, the organizing principle was that the physical presence in Judea, the centrality of Jerusalem, the presence of the temple. You might have not gone to the temple, 3 times a year as you were supposed to, but it was still your point of orientation to Judaism, and the worship of the sacrifices that occurred in the temple. All of those elements were gone when the Romans deported the Jews. As I mentioned, the 2,300-year-old European-Israeli conflict, which still is today and maybe even reaching a high point, started when the Europeans invaded Judea, first the Greek, then the Romans, then they deported us, mostly to Europe. So that was Judaism 1.0, and that was meant to be the end of Judaism. They killed our organizing principle. They killed our anchor. The Jews are exiled, and historians today still cannot fully figure out how it happened that Judaism was able to transform and survive. I think it's easier for theologists to figure that out than historians. But Judaism did survive by transforming to what I call Judaism 2.0. The synagogue replaced the temple, the structured prayers replaced the worships, the presence in the ghetto, in the isolated Jewish community, replaced the presence in the isolated Judea, and the ritualistic yearning to go back to Zion replaced the physical presence in Jerusalem. So that was Judaism 2.0 that was for 2,000 years, and as Theodor Herzl said, became reactionary to the number one feature of Judaism, which is European persecution. All we do is just react. We're that sea lion, that react to the ocean of European persecution.
Before you go on, what is the year that the Jews are exiled out of Judea, which is modern day Israel?
It was a gradual process that was in the first, second, third century, there's different views of exactly when was all the Jews, but around the first and second century, about 2,000 years ago.
And what did the Romans are the rulers of the area at that time? What did they call Judea, Zion, modern day Israel? And why did they give it a different name?
They gave it a different name to dispel any connection of Jews or Judeans to Judea. They called it Palestine, and it most likely was based on the arch rival of Jews in biblical times, which was 1,000 years prior, the Philistine, which were extinct for centuries at that time. So to kind of stick it to the Jews and not to have any connection, they called Judea Palestine. They changed the name of Jerusalem as well. And over the centuries, the term Palestine became an acceptable term by the Jews themselves. There was the yearning to go back to Palestine until the mid-20th century. A few decades ago, Palestine is associated with Judaism. Only recently, through a process that we can talk about, which is quite fascinating, through a European colonialist process, the Europeans have engineered the term Palestine to symbolize the Palestinian Arabs national movement.
There's an irony in marketing here. They often say in political marketing, if you use a term often enough, it'll become the new truth. And in general marketing, get the term out there, get it acknowledged and recognized. And so the term Palestine is now associated not to the Judeans from years gone by, but to the Muslims who co-dwelled in the neighborhood.
Yes, and that is quite astonishing because going back 100 years, the Muslims supported this. The headline of I think it was the Times of London in late 1917 was Palestine to the Jews. That was how they reported the Balfour Declaration. That was supported by the world. It was supported by the Hashemite king of Syria, which is today his descendants. His family controls Jordan. It was supported by the local Arabs. The British Prime Minister David Lloyd George did research along with T. Lawrence of Arabia. 1920 was a utopian year where Palestine was Jewish. There was a what we call today a two-state solution, a Jewish state in the making, a Jewish homeland in the making in Palestine, which is today's Israel, including Judea and Samaria, and including parts of the East Bank, both the west and the east bank of the Jordan River, and an Arab pro-Zionist kingdom in Syria that had the support of Arabs, including Arabs in Palestine. So this was, an organic version, if you will, of the two-state solution that was disrupted, like everything else in our history, by the Europeans because France wanted Syria for itself. France, as we all know, is Dar el-Français. It belongs to France. So they invaded. They kicked out the king, the Hashemite family. Because of that, the British had to carve out Palestine, along the Jordan River. So the East Bank went to the Hashemite king. The West Bank became the Jewish homeland. And over time, they needed to engineer a new identity for those Arabs. Nationalism was very nascent, but those Arabs that felt a sense of collective nationalism expressed as Syrian. There's interviews and accounts of that, of of Arabs in Jerusalem and in cities in Palestine saying we're Syrians. Europeans come in and says no. From now on, get used to this new term, Palestinians. And guess what? The colonialist office will also create a flag for you. The flag that we use today in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. This is a flag created by Mark Sykes. The same Sykes of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, as a colonialist effort to engineer those what he didn't care anything about, those Arabs in Palestine, and say, not Syrian, you're Palestinians, and then, fast forward into the decades, and you have all those Europeans just using the Arabs in Palestine, which are now called Palestinians, for their own benefits. First, the British, that they used them to oppose the Jews, because even though the British got a mandate to usher in a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they wanted Palestine as one of their colonies. And I had the privilege of talking to David Lloyd George granddaughters, Margaret McMallan, who is probably the most prominent historian, World War I historian, and historian of that area. And we spoke for a while. She stressed that this was the British never viewed this as a mandate, ushering in a Jewish state. They treat it as one of their colonies. And what do you do when you have a colony? You apply the divide and rule. So you have all those Jews here, and you have those Arab in Palestine who are supporting the Jewish, but so they use them to oppose the Jews, and they promoted the most radical elements and families in the Palestinian society, namely the Husseinis. They allowed them to kill the moderate. So the British used the Palestinians to oppose the Jews, and then the Germans, as we know, used the Palestinians to oppose the British, which is a common war tactic. And what we've been seeing over the last 20 years since the Oslo Accords is the emergence of the EU-sponsored conflict industry that pays for NGOs that incite Palestinians against Israel. They've developed the idea of Palestinianism, and they use that as a vehicle both to oppose the Jewish state and by extension to oppose the United States.
This is information that most of us are unaware of. We think of the conflict as organic, not that it was machine-made, man-made. And it's actually sad that our brains are so easily turned.
Absolutely. The conflict is what the Western media, so I dedicate 2 chapters in my book about how not just the conflict, but the post-October 7th world turning to what you described at the beginning in your introduction. You can indoctrinate people quite easily. And the conflict no longer, by the way, belongs to the Palestinians. The supporters of the state of Palestine in the public squares in Europe and in the United States, they don't care about the Palestinians. They now care about justice. It's an issue of justice for them. And, those people who oppose the relocations of Gazans from Gaza into, safer places, they don't care about the Palestinians. They need to use them for the promotion of their idea of the state of Palestine, because how can you have a state of Palestine without Palestinians? So we've, for a long time, many people in the West, in Europe, including in the Biden administration, have dehumanized the Palestinians and have used them to promote the Western concept of Palestinianism, in part or to a large extent, as a vehicle to oppose the Jewish state, and at least in my view and in many people's view, by extension, as a vehicle to oppose American domination and Americans' leadership in the world, just like they're using the ICC to do that.
So you're saying, in a way, that it's a wedge against the sense of exceptionalism, which is a United States self-identification, or nationalism, meaning I care about my country and I care about growing my country?
Even simpler than that. There's 2 things that Europeans, and I just want to clarify, I'm a Europhile. I love Europe. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and I have a lot of friends in Europe as part of the European elites, and I have friends with the EU people. I talk to them about this all openly, and they share with me that there's 2, and I mean, that's my view, and they don't disagree with that. And there's 2 things that the European psyche, the European mind cannot accept yet. One is the shift of power from Europe to the United States, to its little colony over there. Because for 2,000 years that we talked about earlier, Europe was the dominating global power. I mean, dominating to the tune of the world was Europe. Since the Greek and the Romans, the world, or at least the Western world, was Europe. The fact that power has shifted after World War I mostly to the United States is something that the Europeans cannot accept and will not accept. It will take centuries. So they're using all, the Jewish state and the promotion of the idea of Palestinianism, which no longer, by the way, is about the people geographically about people, but about Western concept. I saw the person that was burning Tesla cars had a Palestinian flag, an American guy. So it's about anarchism, anti-Americanism. So the one thing is that the Europeans do not accept the idea of America, and they're using this construct, against that. And the second thing that is just absolutely impossible for the European mind to accept, and it's tying back to what Theodor Herzl identified, is the Zionist revolution, the idea of the Jewish state. It's too early. The 2,300-year-old Israeli conflict didn't end in 1948. It just shifted, and we're seeing it now, and we're seeing it intensifying. The ICC thing that we talk about, the headline, the biggest thing, is not the indictments by the ICC against the Jewish state leaders and the preparation of the infrastructure to arrest all of us, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to prepare the legal infrastructure to arrest all Israeli soldiers and those who support them. And the biggest thing is that when they issue those arrest warrants, you would expect benevolent European countries like France and Norway and Spain and Ireland to say, you're crazy. Right. We're defunding you. We're sanctioning you. Get out of the Netherlands. You have 24 hours. We've been to this movie 80 years ago when somebody issued arrest warrants against the Jews. We're not doing this again. Never again is never again, and did the exact opposite.
Right.
France said exactly what they said 80 years ago. The law is the law. The German issued arrest warrants against the Jews, so we will collaborate and arrest our Jews. They've done the same thing today. That is the headline. That shows you that we are way too early at anywhere close to reaching a peaceful resolution between Europe and Israel. We need to think in terms of conflict management, and that's why the strong Jewish state that continues to beam its light to Europe and around the world is European will need us. So
perhaps some of this has to do with being a strong Jewish state
Absolutely.
commercially and marketing to that tune as well. And we don't have to react all the time. Perhaps we can lead by explaining the technologies that are present and coming out of Israel and coming out of the engineers and the designers and the innovative thinkers, that for some reason Israel produces a preponderance of folks who think differently, develop innovatively, and are hugely successful in the commercial international markets.
Absolutely. We have to innovate in order to survive, in any, both when it comes to our physical attack on the Jewish state and the ideological attack. Remember like a decade ago, we were all nervous because you had all those rockets flying at Israel and they were acquiring more and more rockets out of the blue. Miracle, you can use whatever you want to call it, came Iron Dome. It wasn't like some 30-year process that if you follow how Iron Dome came, that's just one of hundreds of examples how Israeli innovations are a necessity. We have to innovate. And because we have to innovate, then we can share this light with the world. I watched Vice President Vance deliver an address in a technology conference yesterday. And he said something interesting, that the outsourcing to cheap labor is a drug. He claims that because there is a tendency in American business to outsource offshore to cheap labor or bring cheap labor in, then there is a built-in reluctance to innovate. We have the opposite situation in Israel. We have to innovate in order to survive. So innovation, both in terms of technology, medicine, social engineering. Look at the protests right now as we speak. There's protests downstairs here in Jerusalem, but look how I don't want to say civil, but when there's protests in other countries, there's violence and people kind of don't have here. It's within certain confines. No friendships have been broken up because of protests, and we've seen that after October 7th, we're all united. There's no protest inside the armored vehicle or tank. So we are innovating. For us, this is an Israeli interest, but we are sharing and fulfilling a role of Tikkun Olam. The Jewish state is the Tikkun Olam state. And by the way, a lot of American Jews, have this great opportunity. A lot of American Jews, especially associated with the Reform movement, like the idea of Tikkun Olam, which means quite literally repairing the world. That the Jewish role is to make the world a better place. And now it's the best time to be a Jew because you can fulfill the mission of Tikkun Olam by centering your identity around your Zionist identity around Israel. You can be a partner of this Tikkun Olam, of repairing the world, of this light coming out of Zion, just by being a Jewish person and centering your identity around the Jewish state, whether it's addressing famine by turning air into water, whether it's medical innovations, whether it's social innovations. We're spreading the light. And I think people around the world have a choice. They can embrace the light and benefit from it, or they can oppose it. And never before, after October 7, has there been this clear choice to either bless the Jews or curse the Jews. And every nation and individuals are making the choice right now as we speak.
Gol, that's a perfect way to sum up this chapter of our discussion. And I would add only that in the Tikkun Olam spirit, that we should put Israel at the center, and or at least as a partner, side by side, in discussing what Judaism philosophy and way of life brings as a positive to the world, and what Israel as a country brings as a positive to the world in technology, commerce, thought leadership, design, and quality of life.
Absolutely.
Gol, thank you so much for sharing your ideas, for sharing your books with us, that I encourage all of us to read, because you're such a great writer. It's easy to get through these books quickly, and your brain will change forever because you'll be more knowledgeable and more ready to be prepared for the next chapter of your life. Gol, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shawana. And thanks for everything that you're doing.
It's a pleasure. We'll see you Bashana Haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, near your
Amen.
house. Amen.
Wonderful.
Toda rabah.
My pleasure.
To see more conversations with extraordinary Israeli business entrepreneurs, visit theisraelconference.org.
For when I stumble, you hold them up, I watch them crumble.